I still remember how the kitchen tile felt against my knees as I scrubbed it at 2:30 in the morning, 3 days before Colette's birthday celebration. My hands were raw from cleaning, my back ached, and all I could think about was the long list of tasks still waiting for me. 25 people. That's what my mother-in-law had announced over Sunday dinner, her voice dripping with the assumption that I would handle everything, as always. "The whole family is coming, Margot," she'd said, not a question, but a command disguised as an exciting announcement. Xavier, my husband of 8 years, had squeezed my hand under the table in what I suppose he thought was solidarity. "You'll need to start at 5 a.m. on Saturday to get everything perfect," he'd added helpfully. I had nodded, smiled that particular smile I'd perfected over the years, the one that never quite reached my eyes, and said, "Of course." But something had shifted inside me as I knelt on that kitchen floor in the middle of the night, trying to remove a stain that had probably been there since before we moved in. Perhaps it was the cumulative weight of 1,000 small surrenders. Or maybe it was the casual way Xavier had volunteered my time without consultation. Whatever the catalyst, I felt something crack, not dramatically like glass shattering, but quietly, like ice on a spring lake. I stood up, my knees protesting after an hour on the hard floor. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and Xavier's gentle snoring from upstairs. He hadn't even noticed I wasn't in bed. When was the last time he had? The calendar on the wall mocked me with its color-coded commitments, all mine, all serving others, none reflecting anything I actually wanted. I walked to it, tracing my finger over Saturday's entry, now marked with Colette's birthday, 25 people. My suitcase was already packed. It had been for months, tucked away in the back of my closet behind winter coats, my secret rebellion, my escape plan with no execution date until now. I changed quickly into travel clothes, wrote a brief note, and placed it beside the raw chicken I'd taken out to thaw. At 3 a.m., I wasn't on my knees scrubbing floors anymore. I was sitting on a plane to Miami, watching through the window as the lights of our suburban neighborhood grew smaller until they disappeared altogether. I'd never done anything like this before. Margot Fleming Devereaux didn't run away. She accommodated. She anticipated needs before they were voiced. She smoothed ruffled feathers and swallowed her own desires so thoroughly that eventually she forgot she had any. That woman stayed up until 2 a.m. preparing for her mother-in-law's birthday. She didn't flee to Miami with a hastily purchased ticket and a heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. The plane hummed around me, the cabin dim and most passengers sleeping. I couldn't close my eyes. Every time I did, I saw Xavier's face when he'd walk into the kitchen at 5 a.m., expecting to find me already cooking, already serving, already diminishing myself to make his family comfortable. Instead, he would find raw chicken, and my note, "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I need time to remember who I am. Please don't try to find me." Brief, direct. Nothing like the Margot they knew, who would have written paragraphs of explanation and apology. I turned my phone off as the plane reached cruising altitude, knowing it would start ringing incessantly once they found the note. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace, despite the circumstances. The decision had been made. There's no going back now. My connection to Miami had been impulsive, but not random. My college roommate Persephone lived there now. Vibrant, unapologetic Persephone, who had always lived life on her own terms. We had kept in sporadic contact over the years, more holiday cards and occasional texts than true friendship, but she was the only person I could think of who wouldn't immediately tell me to go back home. I had texted her from the airport, "Come into Miami. Long story, need a place to stay for a few days. Is that crazy?" Her response had been immediate. "My guest room is yours. Crazy is underrated." The sun was rising as we landed, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Florida looked nothing like the gray Connecticut morning I'd left behind. I turned my phone on briefly at the gate. 17. Missed calls already, a barrage of texts. I sent one message to Persephone to let her know I'd arrived, then turned it off again. Whatever chaos I'd created would still be there later. For now, I needed to breathe. Persephone was waiting outside baggage claim, her wild curly hair now streaked with strands of silver that somehow made her look even more striking. She embraced me without hesitation, then held me at arm's length to study my face. "You look terrible," she announced with characteristic bluntness. "When did you last sleep?" "Define sleep," I replied, attempting humor, but hearing the exhaustion in my voice. "That bad?" She took my small suitcase. "Come on, you can tell me everything after you've had some rest and decent coffee. The Devereux family drama will keep." I froze at the mention of their name. "How did you—" "Please." Persephone rolled her eyes. "You married into Connecticut aristocracy with more family politics than a small European nation, and you've been gradually disappearing ever since. Something was bound to give eventually." Her assessment stung with its accuracy. Had I really been so transparent to everyone except myself? I followed her to her car, a bright yellow convertible that seemed to announce her presence before she arrived, so quintessentially Persephone that I almost smiled despite everything. Her condo was on the 20th floor of a building overlooking the ocean, all clean lines and bright colors, so different from the traditional colonial home I shared with Xavier. She showed me to the guest room. "Take a shower, take a nap, take whatever you need," and left me alone with my thoughts and my small suitcase of hastily packed belongings. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by what I'd done. I'd walked away from my life with no real plan beyond escape. The carefully constructed persona of Margot Devereux, perfect wife, ideal daughter-in-law, endless giver, had finally collapsed under its own weight, but I had no idea who existed beneath it. The woman who had fled in the night was a stranger to me. Sleep claimed me before I could shower, a deep, dreamless unconsciousness that lasted until late afternoon. I woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was until the sound of waves through the open window brought it all rushing back. My phone was on the nightstand, plugged in, Persephone's doing, and the notification light blinked insistently. 34, missed calls now, 22 voicemails, 58 text messages. I couldn't face them yet. Instead, I showered, washing away the lingering scent of cleaning products and the stale air of overnight travel. In the bathroom mirror, I hardly recognized myself. When had those lines appeared around my eyes? When had the light in them dimmed? My hair, once my pride with its unusual copper gold color, looked flat and lifeless, pulled back in its practical ponytail. I released it, watching it fall past my shoulders, and tried to see the woman Xavier had fallen in love with 10 years ago. Persephone was in the kitchen when I emerged, chopping vegetables with efficient precision. perfect timing," she said without looking up. "Dinner in 20. There's wine in the fridge if you want some." I poured myself a glass of white wine, the cool liquid both foreign and familiar on my tongue. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had a drink without calculating how it would affect my ability to complete the next task on my endless list of responsibilities. "So," Persephone said, sliding the vegetables into a wok with a satisfying sizzle, "want to tell me why you're suddenly on the run from Connecticut's most prestigious family?" The story spilled out of me then, not just the birthday dinner demand that had been the final straw, but everything. How I'd gradually surrendered pieces of myself over 8 years of marriage. How Colette had subtly but persistently criticized everything from my cooking to my clothes to my inability to produce grandchildren. How Xavier had evolved from the man who'd once loved my independence to someone who expected me to orbit around his family's needs without complaint. "They've been planning this birthday celebration for months," I explained, the wine loosening my tongue, "but no one bothered to consult me until 3 days before, when Colette announced that the whole family was coming, as if my time isn't valuable, as if I exist solely to make their lives more comfortable." Persephone nodded, unsurprised. "And let me guess, if you'd suggested catering or asked for help, there would have been this whole production about how it's just not the same and family traditions matter?" I stared at her, startled by her accuracy. "How did you know?" "Because I've watched this happening to you for years, Margot. Every time we talked, you were a little more faded, a little more apologetic about taking up space in your own life." She served the stir-fry onto 2 plates. "The real question is, what now? Is this a weekend rebellion or something more?" The question hung between us as we ate. I had no answer. I hadn't thought beyond escape, beyond the desperate need to breathe without the weight of expectations crushing my lungs. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "I just know I can't go back to being who I was yesterday." "Good," Persephone said firmly, "because that Margot was disappearing and I've missed my friend." After dinner, I finally checked one text message from Xavier, sent just an hour ago. "Please, just tell me you're safe. I'm worried sick. We can figure everything else out, but I need to know you're okay." It was the first message that wasn't demanding I come home immediately or expressing shock at my completely out of character behavior. Something about its simplicity, its lack of recrimination, made my throat tighten. I sent a brief reply. "I'm safe. I need time. Please respect that." His response was immediate. "Thank God. Take the time you need. I love you." 3 simple words that should have comforted me, but instead made me ask myself, did he love me, or the version of me that had carefully constructed herself around his needs? I didn't know anymore, and that uncertainty was the most terrifying realization of all. The next morning, I woke to the sound of waves and unfamiliar birdsong. For a moment, I lay still, savoring the absence of a to-do list, the freedom to simply exist without immediately serving someone else's needs. Persephone was already gone, a note on the kitchen counter informing me she had an early meeting but would be back by noon. "Make yourself at home," she'd written. "There's a beach bag in the closet if you want to go down to the ocean. Live a little." The suggestion was both tempting and terrifying. When was the last time I'd done something purely for pleasure, without calculating its benefit to someone else? I couldn't remember. With sudden determination, I found the beach bag, changed into the one bathing suit I'd packed, and headed downstairs. The beach was relatively quiet on a weekday morning. I found a spot not too far from the water's edge and spread out the towel Persephone had included in the bag. The sun was already warm against my skin as I sat, watching the waves roll in and out with hypnotic regularity. I closed my eyes, feeling the heat seep into muscles perpetually tight from stress and overwork. My phone vibrated in the bag. I had finally turned it back on, though I'd silenced most notifications. This was a text from Colette, the first direct communication from my mother-in-law since I'd left. I don't understand what game you're playing, Margot, but your behavior is deeply hurtful to this family. Xavier is beside himself. I expected better from you. No question about my well-being, no acknowledgement that I might have had reasons for my departure, just disappointment that I had failed to meet her expectations. For the first time, I saw the message for what it was: manipulation cloaked in concern, designed to pull me back into line. I deleted it without responding. Instead, I walked to the water's edge, letting the waves lap at my ankles. The ocean stretched before me, vast and indifferent to human concerns. I waded deeper until the water reached my waist, then dived beneath an incoming wave. The world disappeared in a rush of bubbles and blue, all sound muted except for the thundering of my own heartbeat. When I surfaced, gasping and pushing wet hair from my face, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Joy, simple, uncomplicated joy in a physical sensation. I swam until my arms ached pleasantly, then returned to my towel to dry in the sun. A family was setting up nearby. Mother, father, 2 young children squabbling good-naturedly over beach toys. I watched them with a strange detachment, recognizing the life I was expected to want, but had never actively chosen. Xavier and I had discussed children, of course, or rather, Colette had discussed our lack of children at every opportunity, and Xavier had begun to echo her concerns. "We're not getting any younger," he'd say, as if reproduction were simply another task I was procrastinating on rather than a profound life change. I had deflected, made excuses about wanting to establish my graphic design business first, about waiting for the right time. The truth? That I wasn't sure I wanted children at all, at least not under the current power dynamics of our relationship, was something I'd never voiced aloud. My phone vibrated again. Xavier this time. "Mom's upset about the birthday. I told her it doesn't matter right now. Just want to make sure you're still okay. Call when you're ready." A small concession, putting my well-being before his mother's birthday plans. Was it enough? I didn't know, but for the first time, I allowed myself to consider that maybe, just maybe, Xavier wasn't the villain in this story. Perhaps he was as trapped in family patterns as I was, just playing a different role. I texted back, "Still okay, not ready to talk yet, but soon." It was the most I could offer. When Persephone returned from her meeting, she found me sitting on her balcony, sketching the coastline, something I hadn't done in years, despite having studied art in college. She sat across from me, kicked off her professional heels, and studied my drawing. "You're still good," she said, sounding almost surprised. "Why did you stop?" "No time," I answered automatically, then caught myself. No, that's not entirely true. I convinced myself it wasn't important enough to make time for. "And who helped you reach that conclusion?" Persephone's gaze was knowing. I set down my pencil, confronting a truth I'd been avoiding. Colette thought graphic design was a nice hobby, but not a serious career. Xavier agreed it wasn't practical. I just internalized their assessment. And what do you think? The question was simple but profound. What did I think? When was the last time my opinion had been the deciding factor in any aspect of my life? I think I've been away from myself for so long that I'm not sure I know how to find my way back, I admitted. Well, Persephone said, reaching for my sketch, this seems like a pretty good starting point. That evening, as we shared another bottle of wine on the balcony, Persephone asked the question I'd been dreading. Are you leaving him? I stared out at the darkening ocean. I don't know. I don't even know if that's what I want or if I'm just reacting to years of feeling invisible. For what it's worth, she said carefully, I always liked Xavier. Before the wedding, anyway. He looked at you like you hung the moon. It was his family that worried me, the way they closed ranks around him, the way his mother measured you against some impossible standard. He was different then, I said, remembering the man who had pursued me with such single-minded determination, who had loved my independence and creativity. Or maybe I was different, stronger, more certain of myself. People don't change completely, Persephone mused. They just adapt to their environments. Sometimes those adaptations go too far. I considered this, wondering if the Xavier I had fallen in love with still existed somewhere beneath the man who had gradually become his mother's son rather than my partner. And if he did, was that enough reason to try again? I need to figure out who I am before I can decide whether we still fit together, I said finally. Persephone nodded. Stay as long as you need. Consider it an overdue sabbatical from your life. On the third day, reality intruded. Xavier's sister Celeste called, the only member of his family I had maintained a genuine friendship with, independent of our in-law status. I answered cautiously. Before you ask, I'm not telling him where you are, she said immediately, though he's figured out you're with Persephone. Process of elimination. How is he? I asked, surprised by how much I wanted to know. Honestly, a mess, but also, I don't know, Margot. Something's different. He stood up to Mom yesterday for the first time in, well, ever. My heart stuttered. What do you mean? She was going on about how irresponsible you are, how you've always been unreliable, the usual Colette special when someone defies her, and Xavier just stopped her and told her she was being unfair, that he was beginning to understand why you left. She paused. It was like watching continental drift in real time. I sat down, unprepared for this development. What did Colette do? Typical narcissistic meltdown, tears, accusations, the whole production. But here's the thing, Xavier didn't back down. He actually left her house while she was still crying. Dad called later to try to make peace, but Xavier told him this wasn't about taking sides. It was about recognizing that we, had all taken you for granted. The information was too much to process. Xavier standing up to Colette was like witnessing a reversal of gravity. It had never happened in all the years I'd known him. The birthday dinner's been canceled, by the way, Celeste added. Mom's telling everyone it's because she's too distraught over your abandonment of the family. But really, Xavier refused to participate, said there was nothing to celebrate. After we hung up, I sat on Persephone's balcony, watching the endless rhythm of the waves and trying to make sense of my conflicting emotions. Part of me felt vindicated by Xavier's stand against his mother. Another part wondered if it was too little, too late. And beneath it all was the uncomfortable question. If Xavier was finally setting boundaries with his family, What excuse did I have for not returning home? But returning as whom? The accommodating Margot who had disappeared into the Devereux family's expectations? Or someone new? Or perhaps someone old, rediscovered after being buried for too long? I think I need to go somewhere else, I told Persephone that evening, somewhere neither Xavier nor I have ever been, somewhere I can think without his family's shadow hanging over me. She studied me thoughtfully. I might have just the place. My company owns a small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's basic but comfortable. Complete solitude except for the occasional hiker passing through. No one would look for you there. The idea was appealing. Neutral territory, a place without associations or expectations. Could I really do that? The question, Persephone said gently, is whether you can afford not to. 2 days later, I was driving a rental car up winding mountain roads, following directions to Persephone's company cabin. The landscape grew more dramatic with each mile. Towering trees, glimpses of distant ridges, blue with haze, the occasional flash of a stream beside the road. It was early autumn, and the first hints of color were appearing in the foliage, spots of red and gold among the green. The cabin itself was set back from a rarely used Forest Service road, small but sturdy, with a covered porch that faced west toward the setting sun. Inside was simple, one main room with a kitchen area and living space, a small bedroom, a basic bathroom, no television, spotty cell service, just quiet and the sounds of the forest. I unpacked my few belongings, now supplemented by supplies I'd purchased in the drive. Food, some basic art materials Persephone had encouraged me to buy, books. Then I sat on the porch steps and listened to the unfamiliar birds, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant gurgle of water. No demands, no expectations, no performance required. I texted Xavier from the edge of the property where I could get 1 bar of service. I'm safe, taking some time at a friend's cabin to think. We'll contact you when I'm ready to talk. His reply came hours later when I checked again. Thank you for letting me know. I miss you, but I understand you need space. I'm doing some thinking too. The simplicity of our exchange, stripped of the emotional manipulation I'd come to expect from conflicts, was refreshing. Maybe distance was clarifying for both of us. Days at the cabin fell into a natural rhythm, dictated by sunlight rather than obligations. I woke with the dawn, made coffee, and sat on the porch watching the mountains emerge from morning mist. I sketched for hours, rediscovering the joy of creating without judgment. I hiked nearby trails, my body growing stronger, more certain in its movements. I read books I'd been meaning to get to for years. And I thought about my marriage, about the gradual erosion of my identity, about what I wanted from whatever life remained ahead of me. After a week, I finally listened to the voicemails that had accumulated on my phone. Colette's messages moved from imperious demands to wounded accusations to grudging concern. Xavier's evolved from panicked confusion to quiet pleas to thoughtful reflections. It was the last one that made me sit down hard on the porch steps. Margot, it's me. I've been doing a lot of thinking since you left. At first, I was just hurt and confused, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I've been failing you for years. I let my family, especially my mother, dictate too much of our lives. I watched you shrink to accommodate us, and instead of protecting you, I expected you to keep shrinking. His voice cracked slightly. I've started seeing a therapist. Just 2 sessions so far, but it's helping me see patterns I was blind to before. I don't know if we can fix what's broken between us, but I want you to know I'm trying to understand my part in breaking it. Take all the time you need. I'll be here if you're ready to talk. I played the message 3 times, searching for the manipulation, the subtle guilt trip, but found none. Just honest reflection and the beginnings of accountability. It was more than I had expected, and it complicated the clarity I thought I'd been developing about our relationship. That night, I dreamed of our first apartment, a tiny place we'd rented when Xavier was still establishing himself at his father's investment firm, and I was freelancing as a graphic designer. We'd been happy there despite the leaky faucets and temperamental heating, building our own traditions, making decisions together. When had that changed? When had we stopped being partners and started being performer and audience? The move to Connecticut had been the turning point, I realized, when Xavier's father offered him a full partnership in the family business, conditional on our relocation from Boston to be closer to the main office. I'd left my growing client base, my network of artist friends, my favorite coffee shop where I'd sketched for hours, all for Xavier's career, for his family connections, for his vision of our future. If I were honest with myself, the seeds of resentment had been planted then, though it had taken 8 years for them to fully bloom. I'd told myself I was being supportive. That compromise was part of marriage, but the truth was that I had compromised while Xavier had simply accepted my sacrifice as his due. But his voicemail suggested he was finally seeing this imbalance. Was it enough? Could we rebuild on a foundation that had been so fundamentally unequal for so long? After 2 weeks at the cabin, I had filled a sketchbook with drawings, landscapes, detailed studies of plants and birds, and increasingly, self-portraits. The woman on the pages evolved subtly, first guarded and uncertain, then gradually more present, more defined, as if she were coming into focus after years of deliberate blurring. I called Celeste, needing information without the emotional complexity of speaking directly to Xavier. The prodigal sister-in-law, she answered, her tone warm rather than accusatory. How's the mountain air? How did you know where I am? I asked, startled. I didn't for sure until now, but Persephone mentioned their company cabin once at your wedding, and I figured it was a good guess. Don't worry, your secret's safe. I relaxed slightly. How is everyone? Mom's recovered from her initial shock and moved into martyrdom. She's telling everyone who'll listen about her ungrateful daughter-in-law, while simultaneously planning a reconciliation dinner she's convinced will fix everything. Celeste's eye roll was audible in her voice. Dad's staying out of it as usual, and Xavier... Yes? I prompted when she hesitated. He's different, Margot. Quieter, more thoughtful. He turned down a major client last week because, and I quote, their values don't align with mine. Dad nearly had an aneurysm, but Xavier didn't budge. She paused. He's spending a lot of time in that studio space you set up when you first moved in, the one that gradually became a storage room. My heart contracted painfully. The studio, a small sunroom off the master bedroom that had been my one demand when we purchased the house. I'd envisioned it as my workspace, a place to maintain my graphic design business and pursue my art. But as Xavier's family demands increased and I took on more of the household management to compensate for his long hours, the room had slowly filled with boxes, holiday decorations, things we had no other place for. I hadn't stepped foot in it for at least 2 years. "What is he doing in there?" I asked. "Cleaning it out as far as I can tell. I stopped by last weekend, and all the storage stuff had been moved to the basement. He was repainting the walls." She hesitated. "The color you originally picked, that really specific shade of blue, you had to special order." I closed my eyes, overcome by the significance of this gesture. Xavier was restoring the one space that had been designated as mine, the physical manifestation of my creative self that had been gradually sacrificed to our marriage. "He misses you," Celeste said softly. "We all do, even Mom in her emotionally constipated way. But I get why you left, and for what it's worth, I think it might be the best thing that's ever happened to this family." After I hung up, I hiked to the top of the ridge behind the cabin, needing physical exertion to process this new information. The view from the summit was spectacular, rolling mountains in every direction, valleys filled with autumn colors, the vast sky arching overhead. I sat on a rocky outcrop, letting the breeze cool my flushed face. Xavier was changing, or at least trying to. The question was whether I wanted to be part of that change, or if I needed to keep focusing on my own transformation, independent of him and his family. I stayed at the cabin for a total of 3 weeks. By the end, I had filled 3 sketchbooks, hiked dozens of trails, read 7 books, and come to a decision. I couldn't go back to Connecticut yet. The pull of old patterns would be too strong, the expectations too ingrained, but I couldn't hide in the mountains forever either. I called Xavier on my last morning at the cabin. His voice when he answered was tentative, hopeful. "Margot, are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said, surprised to find it was true. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what happened to us over the years." "Me too." He was quiet for a moment. "I failed you, didn't I? I let my family dictate too much of our lives." The acknowledgement, freely given without prompting, loosened something in my chest. We both failed, in different ways. I stopped advocating for myself. I made myself smaller and smaller until I almost disappeared. "I should have noticed. I should have protected your space in our life together." His voice was thick with regret. Is there a way forward for us?" It was the question I'd been wrestling with for 3 weeks. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly, "but I want to find out. Not by going back to how things were, but by seeing if we can build something new." "Anything," he said immediately. "Whatever you need." "What I need is time on my own terms. I'm not coming back to Connecticut right away. I'm going to Santa Fe for a while." "Santa Fe?" The surprise in his voice was evident. "Why there?" "Because it's where I was offered that artist residency 10 years ago, the one I turned down when your dad offered you the partnership in Connecticut." I hadn't planned to mention this, had tried not to hold it against him, but truth was necessary now if we had any chance of rebuilding. "I've been in touch with the program director. They have a last-minute opening for the fall session." Silence stretched between us, heavy with implication. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued. "I didn't realize you'd been offered a residency then. You never said, because you were so excited about the move, about working with your father. It seemed selfish to mention it." That's exactly the problem, isn't it? You shouldn't have had to choose between your dreams and our relationship." He sighed deeply. "Santa Fe is good. Santa Fe is right. How long will you be there?" 3 months. Through December." "Can I visit?" "Not right away, but eventually?" The question held more vulnerability than I'd heard from Xavier in years. Eventually, I agreed, but I need to establish myself there first, on my own terms. I understand. He paused. What should I tell my mother? It was the first test of our new dynamic, and we both knew it. The old Xavier would have already promised Colette that I'd call her, that I'd join them for Sunday dinner as soon as I returned, that everything would go back to normal. Tell her the truth, I said simply, that I'm pursuing a professional opportunity and our relationship is a work in progress. Beyond that, it's between you and me. Okay, he said, and I could hear the effort it took. I'll handle her. You focus on your art. After we hung up, I stood on the cabin porch one last time, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The path ahead was uncertain, full of potential pitfalls and old patterns waiting to reassert themselves. But for the first time in years, I felt fully present in my own life, making choices based on my needs rather than others' expectations. I drove to the Asheville airport that afternoon, returning the rental car and boarding a flight to New Mexico with nothing but 2 suitcases and a canvas portfolio containing my mountain sketches. The woman who had fled Connecticut in the middle of the night 3 weeks ago would have been terrified by this uncertainty. The woman who landed in Santa Fe was cautiously exhilarated by it. The artist residency was located on the outskirts of Santa Fe, a cluster of adobe buildings surrounding a central courtyard. My assigned space was small but perfect, a studio apartment with high ceilings and northern light, sparsely furnished but with a large work table positioned by windows that framed the distant mountains. So different from Connecticut, from the life I had left behind, yet it felt strangely like coming home. The program director, Valeska, was a striking woman in her 60s, with silver hair cropped close to her head and turquoise jewelry adorning her neck and wrists. "We don't often accept last-minute applicants," she told me as she showed me around, "but your work from a decade ago has stayed with me. I've wondered many times what happened to the promising young artist who turned us down." I flushed, embarrassed by the years of creative dormancy. Life happened, compromise happened, but I'm finding my way back. She nodded, unsurprised. It's a common story. The world is not designed to nurture creative women. We must be ferocious in protecting our right to make art. Her gaze was penetrating. Are you ready to be ferocious, Margot? The question resonated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Ferocious was not a word anyone would have associated with me in recent years. Accommodating, certainly. Reliable, agreeable. But ferocious? Never. Yet I felt a fierceness growing in me. Not anger exactly, though there was some of that, but rather a determination to reclaim what I had surrendered too easily. I'm learning, I answered honestly. The residency program included 12 artists from various disciplines: painters, sculptors, writers, a composer. We each had our private workspaces, but shared communal meals twice weekly and participated in occasional group critiques. It was both structured and free, the perfect balance of community and solitude. I called Persephone after my first week to thank her for her role in my transformation. "I wouldn't be here without you," I told her. "Nonsense," she replied briskly. "You would have reached your breaking point eventually. I just provided a safe landing place." She paused. "Have you spoken to Xavier since you arrived?" "Brief texts. He's respecting my need for space." I hesitated. "Celeste says he's seeing a therapist regularly, and he's restored my studio at home." "Good first steps," Persephone acknowledged. But the real question is whether he's setting boundaries with Colette. It was indeed the question. Xavier's relationship with his mother had always been the third party in our marriage, an invisible presence dictating more than either of us had been willing to admit. I had no illusions that 3 weeks of separation had fundamentally changed a dynamic that had been established over 40 years. "I guess I'll find out," I said. "He wants to visit next month." "And how do you feel about that?" I considered the question, trying to distinguish between the habitual people-pleasing response and my genuine feelings. Cautious, curious, a little afraid that seeing him will pull me back into old patterns, but also hopeful. Is that naive? Not naive, Persephone assured me. Just human. We're allowed to hope for better, Margot, even when experience suggests caution. My first phone call with Colette came 2 weeks into my stay in Santa Fe. I had been avoiding it, letting Xavier run interference, but eventually I accepted that as an adult taking responsibility for my own choices, I needed to speak with her directly. "Margot," she began, her voice carrying that particular note of wounded dignity she had perfected over decades. "I'm glad you finally found time to call." I breathed deeply, reminding myself of my worth, of my right to make choices without apology. "Hello, Colette. How are you?" "How do you think I am?" The question vibrated with repressed emotion. My daughter-in-law abandoned my son without warning, disappeared for weeks, and now has apparently decided to live in New Mexico indefinitely. I'm hardly thriving. In the past, this opening salvo would have sent me into immediate appeasement mode. I would have apologized, explained, justified, promised to make amends. Instead, I let her words hang in the air between us, neither accepting nor rejecting her characterization of events. "I understand this has been difficult for you," I said finally. "It's been difficult for all of us." "If you were unhappy, you should have said something." Her voice hardened. Running away in the middle of the night was childish and cruel. Again, I resisted the urge to defend myself, to list the 100 small ways I had tried to communicate my unhappiness only to be dismissed or redirected. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but I needed to break a pattern that wasn't working for anyone, least of all Xavier and me. And my birthday celebration was the appropriate moment for this pattern breaking? The words were sharp with sarcasm. It was the catalyst, not the cause. I kept my voice even with effort. "Colette, I didn't call to relitigate what happened. I called because despite everything, we're still family, and I believe in the possibility of a healthier relationship moving forward. On your terms, I presume? On terms that respect everyone involved," I countered, including me. There was a long silence. When Colette spoke again, her voice had lost some of its defensive edge. "Xavier says you're attending some sort of art program." "Yes, an artist residency. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time." "He never mentioned you were still interested in art." There was genuine surprise in her tone. I thought that was just a college phase. The comment revealed so much about how little she had really seen me over the years, how completely she had projected her own narrative onto my life. "It was never a phase," I said quietly. "It was an essential part of me that I set aside to focus on being what I thought everyone needed me to be." Another silence, longer this time. I imagined her in her immaculate Connecticut home, struggling to reconcile the compliant daughter-in-law she thought she knew with the woman who had fled in the night and was now calmly establishing boundaries from 2,000 miles away. Desmond and I are planning to visit Xavier next week, she said finally. Perhaps you could recommend a suitable restaurant for dinner? It was such a Colette pivot. No acknowledgement of my revelation, no curiosity about my art, just a practical question that reasserted her primary concern with appearances and social niceties. But beneath the superficial request, I recognized a small olive branch. She was, in her way, trying. The River Bistro would be perfect. I suggested naming a restaurant that was upscale enough to satisfy Colette's standards, but not so exclusive that they'd need to leverage the Devereux name for a reservation. Their fall menu is excellent. Thank you. I'll have Xavier make arrangements. She paused again. He misses you terribly, you know. It was the closest she would come to admitting that my absence had created a genuine void, not just an inconvenience. I miss him too, I said honestly. That's why I'm doing this. So, we have a chance at something real and lasting. I hope you know what you're doing, Margot. Her voice had softened slightly. Family traditions and stability shouldn't be discarded lightly. I'm not discarding anything worth keeping, I assured her, just making room for growth. After we hung up, I sat at my work table, processing the conversation. It had gone better than I'd feared, but not as well as I'd hoped, typical of interactions with Colette. I had maintained my boundaries without becoming defensive, a small victory in itself, and beneath her controlled exterior, I had sensed something new, perhaps not understanding, but at least uncertainty about how to proceed with the new version of Margot, who had emerged from the ruins of the old. I channeled that energy into my work, completing a series of mixed media pieces incorporating text and image, fragments of the note I'd left by the raw chicken, overlaid with abstract representations of confinement and flight. The program's first group critique was scheduled for the following day, and I felt both nervous and excited to share my work publicly for the first time in nearly a decade. The critique session was held in a large common room with neutral walls and excellent lighting. Each artist presented their work briefly, then received feedback from the group. When my turn came, I hung my 3 pieces side by side and stepped back, suddenly vulnerable in a way I hadn't anticipated. These speak to liberation, observed Kamau, a sculptor from Kenya. But not a clean break. See how the text fragments are both obscured and revealed? It suggests a complex relationship with the past. There's anger here, noted Sophia, a painter in her 70s. Righteous anger, but tempered with something else. Regret? No. More like recognition. The observations continued, each artist bringing their unique perspective to my work. No one knew the specific circumstances that had inspired the pieces, but they recognized the universal emotions embedded in the imagery: constraint, rebellion, ambivalence, possibility. Valeska spoke last, her gaze moving thoughtfully between the artwork and my face. You're working with the theme of identity, not just its loss, but its active reclamation. These pieces ask whether we can recover what was surrendered or if we must create something entirely new from the remnants. She smiled slightly. It's a question worth exploring further. I left the critique session feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. To be seen through my work, to have my internal landscape recognized and validated by strangers. It was a form of connection I had forgotten was possible, different from the connection I had with Xavier or his family, but no less vital. That evening, I called him for the first time since arriving in Santa Fe. We had been texting regularly, but hearing his voice made my heart constrict with a complicated mixture of longing and wariness. I spoke with your mother today, I said, after our initial greetings. I know. She called immediately afterward to analyze every word. I could hear the rueful smile in his voice. For what it's worth, I think you impressed her. She used the phrase, more backbone than I gave her credit for. High praise indeed from Colette. I leaned back in the small chair on my apartment's tiny balcony, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. How are you, really? Missing you, working too much, trying to figure out how I became someone who would drive away the person I love most. His honesty was disarming. The therapist says I have enmeshment issues with my family of origin. The clinical term made me smile, despite the seriousness of our situation. That sounds about right. I've been reading that book you bought years ago about boundaries and adult relationships. I found it when I was cleaning out your studio. He paused. I should have read it when you first suggested it. We both should have done a lot of things differently, I acknowledged. But that's not particularly useful now, is it? No, I suppose not. He was quiet for a moment. Your work table is by the east window now. I remember you mentioned once that you liked morning light for drawing. The detail caught me off guard. Evidence that despite everything, he had been listening, had retained small insights into my preferences. Thank you for restoring the studio. It should never have become a storage room, he said simply, just like you should never have become the family caretaker by default. I see that now. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by his acknowledgement of dynamics we had both participated in, but never directly addressed. Xavier, I'm still planning to complete the full residency program, 3 months. I know, I support that. His response came without hesitation. But I was hoping, would it be okay if I visited? Just for a weekend, on your terms. I want to see you, see your work, see the life you're creating there. The request was reasonable, respectful of my boundaries, while expressing a genuine desire for connection. Yes, I said after a moment's consideration, not this month. I need more time to establish myself here, but next month perhaps? Thank you. The relief in his voice was palpable. I'll arrange everything. Just tell me which weekend works best for you. After we hung up, I sat watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky, so different from the light-polluted Connecticut nights. Xavier was trying, genuinely, consistently trying to understand his role in our dysfunctional patterns and to support my autonomy. It was more than I had dared to hope for when I had fled 3 weeks ago. Yet cautious optimism was not the same as blind faith. Words were important, but actions over time would be the true test of whether we could rebuild something worth saving from the wreckage of our old relationship, and more importantly, whether I could maintain my rediscovered sense of self even when faced with the gravitational pull of established dynamics. The weeks passed quickly in Santa Fe, filled with intensive creative work and growing connections with the other artists in residence. I developed a particular friendship with Sophia, the 73-year-old painter whose observation during critique had been so perceptive. She had left an unsatisfying marriage in her 40s to pursue art seriously, and her perspective on balancing relationships with creative autonomy was particularly relevant to my situation. The mistake many women make, she told me as we shared tea one afternoon, is believing there are only two options: complete surrender or complete isolation. The real art is in finding the third way, connection without capitulation. Is that what you did? I asked. She laughed, the sound unexpectedly youthful. Eventually, after making every possible mistake first, I left my husband thinking that was the solution, only to discover I had internalized all the limitations he had placed on me. I was technically free, but still living in the cage I'd built in my own mind. How did you break free of that? Time, distance, a commitment to noticing when I was making decisions based on his imagined disapproval rather than my actual desires. She studied me over the rim of her teacup. You're doing the right things, Margot. Just don't rush the process. Real change isn't a moment, it's a practice. Xavier's visit was scheduled for the first weekend in November, 6 weeks into my residency. I had established a rhythm to my days by then. Early mornings working in my studio apartment, afternoons often spent in the common workspaces or exploring Santa Fe, evenings for reading, reflection, or occasional gatherings with the other residents. I had filled 5 sketchbooks and completed 7 mixed media pieces that felt more authentic than anything I'd created in years. I was nervous about disrupting this careful balance, about whether Xavier's presence would reactivate old patterns or showcase new growth for both of us. I arranged to meet him at a neutral location, a small cafe downtown, rather than at the residency itself. Protecting my creative space felt important, at least for this first visit. Seeing him walk through the cafe door was jarring, the familiar figure of my husband moving through the unfamiliar context of my new life. He spotted me immediately, his face lighting with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. He looked different somehow. Thinner, perhaps, or maybe it was just that his usual confident bearing had been tempered by recent events. Margot, he said as he reached my table, stopping short of embracing me, respecting the invisible boundary between us. You look incredible. I gestured for him to sit. Thank you. How was your flight? Fine. Long. He settled across from me, his gaze taking in the changes in my appearance. Hair loose around my shoulders instead of pulled back. Colors in my clothing instead of the neutral palette I'd adopted in Connecticut, a general vibrancy that had been missing for too long. I almost didn't recognize you at first. I almost didn't recognize myself for years, I replied, the honesty slipping out before I could consider its impact. He flinched slightly, but nodded. I deserve that. It wasn't meant as an accusation, I clarified, just a fact. I lost myself gradually, so gradually that neither of us really noticed until it was nearly complete. The waitress came for our orders, herbal tea for me, black coffee for him. When she left, Xavier reached across the table, not quite touching my hand, but leaving his own within reach. I've missed you, more than I can adequately express. I've missed you too, I admitted, but I haven't missed who I was with you, if that makes sense. It does. He withdrew his hand, accepting the distinction. I've been talking about that in therapy, the difference between missing the person versus missing the role they played in your life. I think for too long I missed the roles you filled rather than seeing you clearly. His insight surprised me, evidence of genuine self-reflection rather than merely strategic concessions to win me back. That's perceptive. Don't sound so surprised, he said with a small smile. I'm capable of growth, even if it took your absence to catalyze it. Our conversation continued through tea and coffee, then a shared plate of pastries. We spoke about his work, the client he had turned down on ethical grounds, the boundaries he was establishing around weekend family obligations, the gradual recalibration of his relationship with his parents. I told him about the residency, the artists I had connected with, the technical challenges and breakthroughs in my current project. It was, I realized with surprise, one of the most authentic conversations we had shared in years. There was an alertness between us that had been missing, a quality of genuine listening rather than merely waiting for the other to finish speaking. We were engaging as equals, neither of us performing the roles we had unconsciously assigned ourselves in the choreography of our marriage. "Would you show me your work?" he asked as we prepared to leave the cafe. "I'd understand if you're not ready to share it yet, but I'd like to see what you've been creating." The request was tentative, respectful of my potential refusal. I considered it, weighing my desire to protect my newly reclaimed creative space against the potential value of allowing him to see this vital part of myself. Yes, I decided, but just the finished pieces in the gallery, not my studio. That space isn't ready for sharing yet. He nodded, accepting the limitation without argument. We walked to the residency program's small gallery where selected works by current residents were displayed. My 3 pieces from the critique session had been included, along with a newer work I had completed just days before. Xavier stood before them in silence, studying each with careful attention. I watched his face, trying to gauge his reaction, surprised by how much it still mattered to me that he understand what I was trying to express. "These are about us, aren't they?" he said finally. "About what happened." "They're about me," I corrected gently, "about my experience of what happened." He nodded, accepting the distinction. "They're powerful, Margot. I can feel the constrictive quality in this one, the way the text is being squeezed out of the frame." He moved to the next piece, and here there's this sense of expansion, of boundaries dissolving. It's beautiful and painful. His genuine engagement with the work touched me unexpectedly, not just polite interest or superficial praise, but a real attempt to understand the emotional landscape I had rendered visible. "Thank you," I said simply. "I never really looked at your earlier work, did I?" The question was rhetorical, heavy with regret. I appreciated that you had talent, but I didn't truly see what you were trying to communicate. "I stopped trying to communicate through art," I admitted. It seemed easier to set it aside than to keep creating in a vacuum. He turned to me then, his expression serious. "I'm sorry, Margot, not just for the big things, but for all the small dismissals that accumulated over time, for treating your passion as a hobby rather than an essential part of who you are." The apology was specific, acknowledging the particular nature of his failure rather than offering generalized remorse. Another evidence of growth, of genuine reflection rather than performative penitence. We had dinner at a small local restaurant I had discovered during my explorations of Santa Fe. Over regional cuisine, we continued our careful rebuilding of connection, not slipping back into old patterns, but tentatively establishing new ones based on mutual respect and attentiveness. "I've booked a room at a hotel downtown," Xavier said as we finished our meal. "I wanted to be clear that I don't have any expectations about us. Not physically, not emotionally. This visit is on your terms." The consideration warmed me, evidence again of his commitment to respecting my boundaries rather than assuming intimacy. Thank you. I think that's wise for now. He nodded, neither disappointed nor surprised. Would you show me some of Santa Fe tomorrow? I'd like to see the city through your eyes. I'd like that, I agreed. We spent the next day exploring together. The historic plaza, the art galleries along Canyon Road, the miraculous staircase at Loretto Chapel. I showed him my favorite spots discovered during 7 weeks of solitary wandering, and we discovered new places together, creating shared memories in neutral territory. It felt both strange and natural to be with him in this new context, free from the expectations and dynamics of our Connecticut life. That evening, our last before his departure, we sat on a bench in the plaza, watching the sunset paint the adobe buildings in shades of gold and pink. A comfortable silence had developed between us, no longer filled with the tension of unspoken resentments or unexpressed needs. What happens when the residency ends? Xavier asked finally. Will you come home then? It was the question that had been hovering unspoken throughout his visit. I considered it carefully, wanting to be truthful without being hurtful. I don't know yet, I answered. Part of me wants to believe we can create something new together, something healthier than what we had before. And part of me is afraid that the pull of old patterns will be too strong, that we'll both slip back into roles that diminished rather than enhanced our lives. He nodded, accepting my uncertainty without trying to resolve it. That's fair. I have the same concerns, though I hope. He trailed off, then started again more decisively. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I support your art, your autonomy, your right to define your own life, whether that includes me or not. The declaration moved me deeply, not a desperate plea to return or a manipulation designed to make me feel guilty, but a genuine affirmation of my worth, independent of our relationship. Thank you. I reached for his hand then, the first deliberate physical contact I had initiated since his arrival. I do love you, Xavier. That hasn't changed. What's changed is my understanding of what love should look like in practice. He interlaced his fingers with mine, the familiar touch now carrying new meaning. I'm trying to learn that too. I don't want to be the man who drove away his wife because he couldn't see past his family's expectations. I want to be worthy of you, not the you who accommodated everything, but the you who knew she deserved better. We both deserve better than what we settled for, I said softly. The next morning, I drove him to the airport. Our goodbye was both emotional and restrained. A tight hug, a brief kiss, a promise to keep talking openly about our evolving thoughts and feelings. As I watched him walk through security, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness at his departure, pride in our mutual growth, and most surprisingly, genuine hope for our future together. Returning to the residency, I channeled that emotional energy into a new series of works, larger, more ambitious pieces, exploring the theme of reconciliation without erasure, not forgetting past hurts, but transforming them into a foundation for something new and potentially stronger. The other artist noticed the shift in my work, commenting on its increased confidence and emotional complexity. You've moved from reaction to integration, Valeska observed during our next critique session. These pieces acknowledge pain without being defined by it. The following weeks brought additional changes. Colette called twice, awkward conversations that nonetheless represented effort on her part. Celeste visited for a weekend, her presence a welcome connection to my former life without its attendant pressures, and Xavier and I maintained our communication, honest, thoughtful exchanges about our individual journeys and tentative explorations of what a reimagined relationship might look like. As the residency program neared its conclusion in late December, I faced the decision I had been both anticipating and dreading. Where to go next? Return to Connecticut and attempt to build a new life with Xavier while maintaining my reclaimed identity? Or continue my independent path, perhaps in Santa Fe or elsewhere, allowing more time and space for my personal transformation? Valeska found me in the common room one evening, staring out the window at the winter stars, visibly wrestling with this choice. The hardest decisions are the ones where there is no clear right answer, she said, settling beside me. Only different paths with different gifts and challenges. I've changed so much in 3 months, I said. But is it enough? Has Xavier changed enough? Have we both changed too much to fit together anymore? Those aren't questions anyone else can answer for you. She regarded me thoughtfully. But consider this. You're asking better questions now than when you arrived. That alone is significant progress. On my final night in Santa Fe, I sat in my studio apartment, surrounded by the artwork I had created during my time there, tangible evidence of my rediscovered voice, my reclaimed creative spirit. I had already arranged to ship the larger pieces back to Connecticut, a decision that itself represented a kind of answer to my dilemma. I called Xavier, ready at last to articulate the choice I had been circling for weeks. I've decided to come back, I told him without preamble. Not permanently, not yet, but for a trial period to see if what we've both learned apart can translate to how we live together. His exhale was audible through the phone. I'm grateful for that chance, Margot. Truly. What are your conditions? I know you must have some, and you should. His assumption that I would have boundaries, his explicit invitation to express them, these were small but meaningful indicators of change. I need my studio to remain my space without compromise. I need to pursue my art as a profession, not a hobby, and I need our relationship with your family to be fundamentally different. Visits on our terms, holidays negotiated, not assumed, and no more using me as a buffer between you and your mother's expectations. Yes to all of that, he agreed immediately, and I'd add that I want us to consider moving, potentially, not immediately, but in the future. Connecticut has too many established patterns for both of us. Maybe somewhere that could be truly ours, not dominated by my family's history. The suggestion surprised me, evidence that he had been thinking deeply about the structural changes needed for real transformation, not just surface-level accommodations. I'd be open to that discussion, I said, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was carrying. The possibility of a fresh start in neutral territory was appealing in ways I hadn't allowed myself to consider. When will you come back? He asked. I'm flying to Boston first, I told him. I want to reconnect with some of my old clients, see if I can rebuild my graphic design business. I'll be there for 2 weeks, and then I took a deep breath. And then I'll come home. But not to cook for your mother's birthday or anyone else's celebration. I'll come home as your partner, not your family's support staff. That's all I want, he said softly. You as yourself, however that looks now. 3 months after I had fled our house in the middle of the night, leaving nothing but raw chicken and a note, I returned on my own terms. Xavier met me at the airport, a bouquet of wildflowers in hand rather than the formal roses he would have chosen before. The gesture was small but telling, an acknowledgement of my preferences rather than societal expectations. The house looked different somehow. Cleaner, less cluttered with Devereaux family heirlooms that had never reflected my taste. My studio was exactly as Celeste had described, freshly painted in my chosen blue, the work table positioned for optimal morning light, empty shelves awaiting the artwork being shipped from Santa Fe. I moved some things around elsewhere, too, Xavier said hesitantly as he showed me through the house. Donated a lot of the formal stuff we never used. I hope that's okay. I smiled, recognizing his efforts to create space, literally and figuratively, for a new chapter in our life together. It's more than okay. It feels lighter in here. That evening, we sat in the living room sharing a bottle of wine and the details of our time apart that hadn't made it into our calls and texts. The conversation flowed easily, without the careful avoidance of sensitive topics that had characterized our communication in the past. There's something else we should discuss, Xavier said, setting down his glass. I've been thinking about therapy, not just for me individually, but for us as a couple, if you're open to it. The suggestion would have been unthinkable from the old Xavier, who had viewed therapy as something for other people with real problems. His willingness to acknowledge that our relationship needed professional support was perhaps the most profound evidence of change. I think that's an excellent idea, I agreed. We're both trying, but we also need tools to help us recognize old patterns before they reassert themselves. He nodded, relieved by my receptiveness. I've already researched some options. There's a practice in Hartford that specializes in couples rebuilding after significant ruptures. We continued talking late into the night, making plans, but also acknowledging the uncertainty ahead. There were no guarantees that our individual growth would translate to a healthier relationship, that we wouldn't slip back into comfortable but destructive patterns. But there was commitment on both sides to try, to remain conscious, to prioritize authenticity over the appearance of perfection. The first test came sooner than expected. The following Sunday, Colette called to invite us to dinner. The whole family will be there, and they're all eager to see Margot now that she's back from her sabbatical. Xavier put the call on speakerphone, meeting my eyes with a silent question. In the past, he would have accepted immediately, assuming my compliance. Now he waited for my response, acknowledging my right to set boundaries. Thank you for the invitation, Colette, I said calmly, but I'm still settling in and reconnecting with Xavier. We'll need to take a rain check this time. There was a momentary silence then. I see. Well, perhaps next weekend then. We'll let you know when we're ready for family gatherings, Xavier interjected smoothly. Margot and I are focusing on rebuilding our relationship right now, and that needs to be our priority. After he ended the call, I leaned against him, unexpectedly moved by his clear prioritization of our needs over his mother's expectations. Thank you for that. For what? He asked, genuinely puzzled. For being a decent husband who respects his wife's boundaries? That's the minimum, Margot. I'm sorry it ever seemed like an extraordinary effort. His response brought tears to my eyes. Acknowledgement not just of his current effort, but of how low the bar had been set in our previous dynamic. We had a long way to go, years of patterns to unlearn, new habits to establish. But in that moment, I allowed myself to believe in the possibility of real, lasting change. My artwork from Santa Fe arrived the following week, carefully packaged and labeled. Xavier helped me unpack each piece, handling them with reverent care, asking thoughtful questions about my process and intentions. As we hung them throughout the house, not just in my studio, but in the living room, the hallway, the bedroom, I realized we were creating visible reminders of my reclaimed identity, markers that would help prevent backsliding into old patterns. The last piece we unwrapped was a small mixed media work I had created specifically for Xavier, though I hadn't told him about it. It incorporated fragments of the note I had left by the raw chicken, but transformed through layers of color and texture into something new, not erasing the painful past, but integrating it into a more complex whole. "This is for you," I said, handing it to him, "if you want it." He studied it carefully, understanding its significance without explanation. "It's beautiful," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "and terrible and hopeful. Like us." "Like us," I agreed. He hung it in his office, not hidden away, but placed where he would see it daily. A reminder of what had been broken and what we were attempting to rebuild, stronger at the fracture points. That night, for the first time since my return, we made love, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence as we rediscovered each other's bodies, changed subtly by 3 months apart. It wasn't the automatic intimacy of our past, the physical connection that had remained even as our emotional connection frayed. It was something new, more conscious, more present. We were seeing each other clearly, perhaps, for the first time in years, without the distorting lens of habit or expectation. Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, Xavier traced patterns on my bare shoulder. "I never want to take you for granted again," he murmured. "Never want to assume you'll always be here, accommodating everything, diminishing yourself to make room for me. And I never want to surrender pieces of myself so gradually that neither of us notices until there's almost nothing left," I replied, placing my hand over his heart. "It wasn't just you, Xavier. I participated in my own erasure." "We'll remind each other," he promised, "when we see old patterns emerging, when we notice one of us shrinking to avoid conflict, when family expectations threaten to override our needs as a couple." I nodded against his chest, knowing that such promises were easier made than kept, but valuing the intention behind them. The real work was just beginning. The daily practice of conscious choice, of communication, of gentle correction when we inevitably slipped into comfortable but unhealthy habits. 2 weeks later, we had our first session with the couple's therapist in Hartford, a calm, perceptive woman who listened to our story without judgment, but with clear-eyed recognition of the dysfunctional patterns we were trying to change. She gave us tools, homework, specific practices to interrupt automatic responses and create space for new choices. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments when the pull of old dynamics felt overwhelming. Xavier still occasionally deferred to his mother's wishes without consulting me. I still sometimes swallowed my needs rather than articulating them clearly. But there was a fundamental difference now. We were both aware, both committed to noticing these slips and correcting course rather than allowing them to become entrenched again. Slowly, we established new traditions, new boundaries, new ways of being together and with his family. Colette remained Colette, critical, controlling, convinced of her rightness, but her power over our relationship diminished as Xavier developed stronger boundaries and I stopped seeking approval I would never receive. My graphic design business began to rebuild, supplemented by commissioned artwork that grew from contacts I had made in Santa Fe. I established a routine that balanced creative work with domestic responsibilities, no longer shouldering a disproportionate share of household management. Xavier adjusted his work schedule to support this balance, demonstrating through actions rather than just words his commitment to our new dynamic. 6 months after my return, Xavier raised the possibility he had mentioned during our phone call from Santa Fe, relocating, starting fresh somewhere without the weight of Devereaux family history. We explored options together, considering my artistic connections in Santa Fe, professional opportunities for Xavier beyond his father's firm, locations that would offer us both the chance to grow without being pulled back into established patterns. It was during this exploration that I discovered I was pregnant, an unexpected development that complicated our careful rebuilding. In the past, a child would have cemented our ties to Connecticut, to the Devereux family legacy. Colette would have inserted herself immediately, claiming grandmother's privileges, dictating choices based on family traditions. But we were different now. The night I shared the news with Xavier, we lay awake for hours discussing what parenthood might mean for our transformed relationship, how we would protect our hard-won boundaries while welcoming this new life. I don't want our child to grow up in the shadow of my family's expectations, Xavier said, his hand resting protectively on my still flat abdomen. I don't want to perpetuate the patterns that almost destroyed us. Then we don't, I said simply. We make conscious choices every day about the family culture we create. We remember that this child belongs to us, not to your parents or their legacy. The decision crystallized over the following weeks. We would move to Portland, Oregon, where Xavier had received an offer from an ethical investment firm, and where I had connections in the art community through one of the residents from Santa Fe, far enough from Connecticut to establish real independence, close enough to an airport for occasional visits on our terms. Telling his parents was as difficult as we had anticipated. Desmond was stoic, but clearly disappointed that his son would not be carrying on the family business. Colette was predictably dramatic, alternating between wounded accusations and manipulative concerns about the baby being raised without family support. We held firm, united in our commitment to breaking old patterns. We need to establish our own family culture, Xavier told his parents, just as you did when you were young. This isn't a rejection of you. It's an embracing of our own path. They didn't understand. Not really. Perhaps they never would. But they eventually accepted our decision, recognizing that pushing harder would only create more distance, not less. The move happened when I was 5 months pregnant, early enough for safe travel, late enough for the pregnancy to feel real. We sold the Connecticut house, keeping only the items that held genuine meaning for us both. In Portland, we found a craftsman-style home with a detached studio building in the backyard, perfect for my expanding art practice and future needs as parents. As I arranged my new studio, hanging artwork from Santa Fe alongside newer pieces created during our rebuilding in Connecticut, I thought about the raw chicken I had left behind nearly a year earlier. Such a small act of rebellion that had catalyzed profound transformation for us both. Not an ending, but a beginning. Messy, unplanned, but ultimately necessary. Xavier joined me in the studio, bringing tea and watching as I organized my space. "Happy?" he asked, the question carrying more weight than its simplicity suggested. I considered it thoughtfully, wanting to be honest rather than merely reassuring. "Yes," I said finally, not in the uncomplicated way I might have defined happiness before, but deeply, consciously, yes. Me too. He set the tea beside me, careful not to disturb my materials. I never would have chosen the path we took. The separation, the pain, the dismantling of everything I thought was certain. But I wouldn't go back to who we were before. Not for anything. I rested my hand on my growing belly, feeling the first fluttering movements of our child. "We're creating something new," I said, the words applying to more than just the baby. Something that honors where we came from without being limited by it. That evening, as twilight settled over our new city, we sat on the porch of our new home, watching the unfamiliar neighborhood transition from day to night. There were still challenges ahead: parenthood, continuing family dynamics, the ongoing work of maintaining healthy boundaries and communication. The changes we had made were still fragile in some ways, requiring conscious reinforcement to prevent backsliding into comfortable but destructive patterns. But there was also a hard-won foundation of mutual respect, of seeing each other clearly and valuing what we saw. The woman who had fled in the night, leaving nothing but raw chicken and a note, had found her voice, her creative spirit, her capacity for both independence and meaningful connection. The man who had unconsciously participated in her erasure had found the courage to examine painful truths and commit to genuine change. Together, we were writing a new story. Not perfect, not without conflict or compromise, but fundamentally different from the one we had been living before that desperate midnight flight. A story where both of us had the space to be fully ourselves while still choosing each other every day with clear eyes and open hearts. The raw chicken had been left behind, but what it represented, my breaking point, my refusal to continue diminishing myself, my desperate bid for self-reclamation, had become the catalyst for the life we were now creating together. Not the ending I had imagined when I boarded that plane to Miami at 3 a.m., but perhaps the beginning we had both needed all along.